Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected professional and an author from Pennsylvania, USA, Mr. George Pesansky. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. George is the president of MyBlendedlearning.com. He's an author of a book titled Super Performance, and we'll be talking about his book today. He's also the founder of Capacity to Care, a nonprofit encouraging super performers to donate their talent, not just their time, to improve outcomes in their communities. So, George, before we come to your book, a few questions for you. You've had a
Yeah.
career spanning more than 3 decades. What originally drew you to the world of operational excellence?
I found myself having an opportunity to learn from what I think is some of the best. I left military service and got a job in the Detroit, Ohio area, where all of the automotive manufacturing was taking place in kind of that early 90s.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to go to some of the training, some of the schools sponsored by those manufacturers, and was exposed to really these wonderful concepts that really drive performance in advanced manufacturing operations, and
Mm.
was really fascinated by the entire process, both the technique but also the development of people.
Right. And you worked across 6 continents. How
Yeah.
has this work shaped your understanding of leadership in different cultures?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that many people who may not really get exposed to a lot of other regions and cultures don't appreciate. Just how different leadership styles and programs and really just strategies in especially manufacturing
Mm.
differ as you go from one region to another. And they all have advantages, but I think it's important to both appreciate and recognize the culture and how those cultures can really empower and help you succeed.
Very interesting. And what inspired you to create Capacity to Care, and how has it impacted communities and leaders?
It, you know, uh, I think there's a point in everyone's life where you realize you have the resources or opportunity to give
Mm.
more than you're taking.
Correct.
And I reached that point in my career and realized that I can donate money, I can certainly donate time, but what makes a difference is the talent that I may be able to bring. And
Mm.
running some experiments of helping some charitable organizations improve their operations the same way that I worked with my clients
Mm.
really brought them a lot more than I could have brought in any other way.
Mm.
And I realized that if I can do this, other professionals can do the same.
Mm.
And that was the birth of Capacity to Care, to really get people to donate their talent,
Yeah.
not just their time or their money.
Amazing. George, let's now talk about your book, Super Performance. And before I ask you a question, I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. George Pesansky's book, Super Performance. So, George, tell me about your book and what was the hypothesis when you wrote it?
I actually never thought I would write a book and was actually a little bit resistant to the idea to begin with, because I do think there can be a paradigm where people write a book and then become rigid to the ideas or concepts that they've outlined in that book. So I've always resisted becoming rigid to ideas and not wanting to kind of stay with a recipe.
Mm.
But I was encouraged to write the book because over these 30 years, we've been able to train so many people, create so much good in so many different industries, that there was just not a large enough audience to benefit from so many of these learnings.
Right.
So we decided to basically take, everything our clients that very large companies pay for and put it into that book. So smaller organizations and individuals starting their career could take advantage of it and hopefully, gain benefit from it.
Fascinating. You call your book a field guide for operational excellence.
Yeah.
Why was a practical, hands on approach so important to you?
This is maybe a little bit controversial, but I kind of find myself being controversial sometimes.
Hmm.
That I think a lot of companies and certainly a lot of organizations that support operational excellence make it much too complicated. They really kind of put together a recipe that only highly specialized and trained, experienced professionals understand and requires a lot of training and a lot of consulting time and a lot of resources. But at its core, the beauty of driving change in an organization and making improvement happen doesn't need to be complicated. And
Mm.
there are so many things that individuals can do. When you think you're not in a position because you're not trained, you don't have those belts, the strategies in the book can really help you perform the same way that some of those resources would perform.
Mm.
So I think we make things too complicated. And I wanted to write a field guide for anyone who can basically apply concepts that are going to create really fantastic outcomes for themselves or their organization.
Thank you. And what, in your view, are some common misconceptions leaders have when they try to implement operational excellence?
One of the things we hear all the time is that it has to be from the top down. That if the C-suite, if the leaders of the organization don't believe in it, don't support it, then, the programs, the efforts around operational excellence are not going to succeed.
Mm.
And I think that's true. But I don't think it's as true as kind of the obvious statement that the leaders must support it. I think the leaders can veto it. They can decide not to support it and will kill it.
Mm.
But just having senior leaders support it is not enough. It absolutely has to demonstrate value. And in the book, we talk about a concept called utility.
Mm.
Utility is the ability to get things done, the ability to create value. And I've watched, unfortunately, programs that really are well supported not succeed because they lacked utility. They lacked the ability to actually create that value. Just
Mm.
because a leader supports it doesn't mean it's going to work. But if it works and a leader supports it, you could have a wonderful program.
Amazing. Your book offers 8 strategies. Can you briefly tell us about these strategies? And if someone was to start with one, which would it be?
That's like asking me which of my children are my
I
favorite.
agree. Tough question.
It is. Um, you know, all of the strategies are intended to kind of help you frame the situation that you're facing in terms of driving opportunity, driving
Mm.
potential. I find maybe the strategy that people immediately kind of grasp and they often really kind of change their paradigm is this idea of understanding the root cause of your success,
Mhm.
especially in operational excellence programs. Most of the effort, the time that we spend is around finding our waste, finding our loss, finding our defects, our costs, our mistakes, and then doing things to improve that.
Mm.
And what I discovered, probably 20, 25 years ago, pretty early in my career, is that that's only part of the equation. That if we took the same amount of time that we spend trying to find the root cause of our problems and studied the root causes of our successes,
Mhm.
if today your listeners went out and looked at that machine, looked at that sales professional, looked at that, part of their business that is the most successful, and really drilled into the root cause of why that person or that group or that machine is successful,
Right.
what they're going to find is they can replicate that. They actually already know the answers to success. They don't have to necessarily go out and discover them.
Great response. And George, how does super performance differ from other leadership performance books on the market?
Yeah. It's a little bit around this idea of the root cause of your success.
Mm.
I've been accused of being kind of an eternal optimist,
Mhm.
that I try to approach situations not for, kind of what it is, but really what it could be.
Mm.
And I think, the theme throughout the book is how to bring that optimism to your team,
Yeah.
to your organization, and to yourself,
Mm.
because fulfillment is really what you define, and being able to sort of really define the opportunity in front of you and look at it in the most optimistic terms really, I think, makes a difference. A lot of other books are obviously very optimistic as well, but we focus on concepts like the golden hour of if you can do something well for a short period of time, then you can extend that
Mm,
time. And we talk about techniques on how to stretch and extend that period of excellence that really kind of gives you that optimism that you can do things a lot more, a lot better, a lot longer than you think you
mm,
can.
well said. My next question is, how can leaders set high expectations without creating an environment of fear or burnout?
You know, in one of the chapters, one of the eight strategies, we talk about a concept called the prison of expectations.
Hmm.
And this is something that I think a lot of leaders don't understand that they are the wardens of this prison
Mm,
because they create a lot of pressure, they create a lot of visibility, they create very high expectations. And then individuals are in a position where if they perform better, the expectation for the next quarter, the next year, the next time is that you're going to be able to do the same again. And what I have found is the people who create value, the operators, the workers, they understand this concept. So they often hold back a little bit
mm,
because if I do too well, then that's going to become the new standard.
mm,
And what that creates is this sort of prison where I can do better, but I on purpose always hold back just a little.
mm,
Leaders who allow failure, ones that are willing to recognize that not every day is going to be our best day, but every day should start with the opportunity to be our best day. And
mm,
then be able to understand what are those things that we could do differently tomorrow to make it better. Coming out hard against a lack of performance creates this prison of expectations.
mm,
And I think leaders who allow that culture of openness and discussion, that allow failure to be accepted as long as we understand,
mm,
they're most likely to escape from that prison.
mm. Well said. You've also mentioned agility and alignment as crucial in times of rapid change. What's one actionable way to keep both?
You know, the three questions that we talk about really throughout the book,
Mm,
I have taken from one of my very favorite authors, Stephen Covey, the what, the how, and the why.
mm,
And being able to really understand the outcome that you are trying to create and
mm,
why it's important, and also being able to clearly define what it is, having a clear, actionable target. I think leaders are responsible for outlining and defining the what and the why.
mm,
But when you allow teams to really define the how and to own the how
mm,
so that they're really iterating the process around how we deliver that outcome and they understand why it's important,
mm.
I think that gives you both agility and alignment by just making sure we can answer those three simple questions.
Well said. And what are moments of peak performance, quote unquote? And how can leaders identify and replicate these moments of peak performance?
This comes back to this concept of the golden hour
Mm,
and the idea of what we do in the short term
mm,
is something that is possible in the long term.
mm,
So literally looking back on, the last week, the last month, and asking yourself, is there a period, even for a short term, where we were most productive, we were most successful? And trying to understand the root cause of the success in that period. What I have found is, in manufacturing operations and really any kind of business or team, when we set a goal for the team to try to extend that golden hour, to try to stretch out and learn from what's helping us make things work,
yeah.
we're having a very different conversation. We're having a conversation about how we grow what it is we do well.
Mm,
I have spent way too many decades kind of talking and working in environments where we spend all of our time with what the problem is with the team, why
mm,
they're not performing, what are the mistakes they're making, what are the issues they have to correct. And that energy doesn't necessarily really always help people really feel confident in their
mm,
performance.
mm,
So identifying those periods with great KPIs, great metrics, and then understanding why they worked is absolutely a recipe for success.
Absolutely. And to continue with what you just said on success, you connect success with structure.
Yeah.
Can you explain why success rarely sticks without it?
You know, systems are so incredibly important. Very early in my career, it was in the military, I learned that if all of the decisions of all of the direction is coming from me, the only thing that's going to happen is what I individually am involved in. And
Mm,
I think a really good way of judging someone's leadership is whether or not they walk away from the operations they're leading and the operation continues to perform without them,
mm,
because that means they've created structure. They have systems. The people working in those systems know what they have to do, they know why it's important, and most importantly, they're owning how it actually has to happen. When that is happening,
mm,
we have really great structure and we have great systems. And I think really great leaders can walk away from those operations and be successful.
Very interesting. George, how can leaders encourage a culture where operational excellence becomes second nature?
I think that starts as kind of the goal for
Hmm.
any organization when they embark on the journey of putting in place, especially a formal or structured operational excellence program. They always talk about this becoming our culture. But I think, one of the things we talk about in the book is sort of walking the walk and talking the talk.
Mm,
I think a lot of leaders talk the talk that we
mm,
want this to be our culture.
yeah.
But being able to go out onto the shop floor, to go into the operations, to see where value is actually being created,
Hmm.
and to understand the implications of the decisions we're making. I
Mm,
don't think you can judge the culture by graphs and KPIs and metrics in a boardroom. I think you'll judge it by walking into a factory and
mm,
seeing whether or not the parking lot has earplugs laying all over it,
right.
because those employees don't care.
Yeah.
But when we see that things are well taken care of, when we see pride and joy in people's eyes, we know that we have a culture of excellence.
Amazing. What are some low cost, high impact actions leaders can take to improve performance in a short period of time?
There's a term that is often used in lean manufacturing called a Gemba walk.
Hmm. Yeah.
And a Gemba walk to me is one of the easiest, least expensive, and most valuable things that anyone can do.
Mm,
And it's going out and listening, learning, and understanding.
yeah.
Removing the idea that we're going to bring this supervisory perspective, that we're going to correct or we're going to dictate, and really appreciating what people are actually experiencing. Have an empathy to understand the work that they're doing and realize that there may be systematic things, there may be policy things that are preventing people from being able to create value
Mm,
or frustrating their ability to improve on the value we're creating. When
mm,
leaders can go and have that hands-on experience at the moment, at the place where value is being created, I think they'll learn far more than can ever be put into a PowerPoint presentation.
amazing. George, I have time for two more questions for you.
Please.
How should leaders deal with resistance from long-standing team members when introducing new performance systems?
I think, resistance is not a negative or a bad thing. I know that when you're experiencing it, could feel awfully negative.
Yeah.
But if you look at the definition of collaboration, the definition of collaboration is really the willingness for a team to speak their mind, to
Mm,
raise their voices, and at the same time, their willingness to be open minded and listen. If we're in a position where I am unafraid to tell you exactly what I think,
mm,
and at the same time, I am completely open minded to have my opinion changed,
mm,
we have the opportunity to collaborate. So, this resistance is somebody speaking their mind.
mm,
And our willingness to listen, I think sometimes leaders make a decision of what they're going to do, and the resistance they're experiencing is the organization, the people trying to tell them that there may be something they're missing,
Mm,
and then they're not willing to listen. And
mm,
we end up with programs that may not have been as good.
Interesting. And my last question for you, if you could leave our viewers and listeners with one thought from your book, Super Performance, what would it be?
I think Peter Drucker has a very famous quote that you can't improve what you can't measure.
Correct.
And I have kind of added, a sort of second kind of phrase to that, that you cannot sustain what you cannot explain.
Mm,
And I think having great systems means that you can clearly explain it. You can
mm,
answer the questions what, how, and why. You can walk away from systems and they're going to continue to succeed.
mm,
We're focused on what we do well, not
mm,
just what we're not doing, as much. And we're okay with letting people not always succeed as long as we understand why and what we can do better next time. I
mm.
think that's what makes a super performer.
Absolutely. And on that note, and this very powerful last comment from you, you cannot sustain what you cannot explain. Thank you, George, for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we had a fascinating discussion about your book, Super Performance, about so many challenges leaders face in organizations and how your 8 strategies can truly help leaders and organizations to achieve that super performance that you talk about. Thank you for speaking to
Thank
me and good luck to you.
thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.